Jim Hawks never saw it coming, nor could he have ever imagined the horrors that awaited him. On a cold October night, when the chill of autumn crept into the bones and the fog curled low against the ground like a living thing, he knew something was off about the cemetery. The night was quiet. Too quiet, but it was supposed to be that way. This was Rosewood Cemetery, after all. A place that most people avoided once the sun went down. It was where the old and the forgotten came to rest. And Jim had spent the last 5 years walking the grounds. He knew every cracked tombstone, every bent iron fence, and every old mausoleum that cast long, eerie shadows in the night. But tonight felt different. The air had a weight to it, a pressure that made his skin crawl even as the fog rolled in, hiding the grave markers in its misty embrace. Jim chalked it up to his exhaustion. His shifts had been longer recently, and the creeping feeling of dread could have been the result of sleep deprivation. He should have gone home hours ago, but there was always one more task to finish, one more thing to check, just to make sure the place was secure for the night. He'd promised his boss that tonight would be his last shift. It was meant to be a final farewell to this forgotten place. After tonight, he would be free, but what he didn't know was that the cemetery wasn't ready to let him go. Jim walked the familiar path between rows of aging graves. The fog moved with him, thick and suffocating. It clung to his clothes like an insidious hand, dampening his every movement. The sounds of the world outside seemed to fade away, leaving him in a suffocating bubble of silence. All he could hear was the occasional rustle of leaves being carried by a phantom breeze, and his own breathing, heavy and strained as though the night itself was pressing in on him. "Just finish up," Jim muttered to himself. He had walked this route 100 times before. The rusted gate at the far end of the cemetery, where the maintenance shed was located, was in sight. He was almost there. He passed the section where the oldest graves were, the ones where the names had worn away, leaving only blank stone markers, the ones no one visited anymore. He paused for a moment, taking in the forgotten tombstones, their edges smoothed with the passage of time. A noise broke the stillness, an unmistakable sound of something shifting in the darkness. Jim's head snapped around, but there was no one there. Not even the faintest whisper of movement in the fog. His pulse quickened, but he forced himself to relax. It was probably just an animal, he thought. Some critter out for a midnight stroll. His flashlight flickered as he swung it around, cutting through the fog. Then he heard it again, this time closer. A scraping sound. It came from one of the nearby graves, one he didn't remember seeing before. The earth was disturbed and the tombstone was slightly askew. Jim frowned. He'd just checked this section earlier in the week, and there hadn't been a new burial here. He stepped toward it cautiously, his heart thumping against his ribs. The fog seemed to cling to his legs, twisting around them like a creeping vine. The scrape was followed by a low, guttural sound, like something was digging, or worse, something was trying to get out. Jim stopped dead in his tracks. It was then that he saw it. The ground near the grave was shifting, small clumps of earth rising up as if the soil itself was moving, as if something was pushing its way out from beneath the surface. His breath hitched. The scraping sound grew louder, more frantic. Jim's instincts screamed at him to turn and run, but he stood frozen, unable to move. He watched as the earth around the grave shifted, the dirt rising like hands trying to break free. The grave was not empty, and that was when Jim realized that this was no ordinary grave. He took a step back, then another, his feet moving of their own accord. His mind screamed at him to get away, to leave, but his body refused to obey. The sound grew louder, more frantic, as if whatever was buried beneath the earth was clawing its way up. Suddenly, with a sickening sound, the ground collapsed. A figure shot up from the grave, its body contorted and twisted, dirt clinging to it like a second skin. Jim's stomach churned as the creature, pulled itself free, dragging itself from the earth. Its face was a mask of decay, skin hanging in shredded tatters, and its eyes, those eyes, were hollow, empty sockets. But they seemed to burn with an unnatural, malicious light. It opened its mouth, revealing jagged teeth that had once been human. Jim stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest. The creature did not speak, did not make a sound. It only reached out toward him with skeletal hands, its fingers stretching toward him like a predator zeroing in on its prey. "Get away," Jim gasped, his voice barely a whisper, as if speaking louder would make it real. He turned and ran. The fog seemed to thicken, wrapping around him, obscuring his vision. His pulse raced as he sprinted toward the gate. He was close, so close, but every time he tried to move faster, his legs felt like lead, as if the earth itself was pulling him back. The scraping sound followed him, growing louder, closer, until it seemed to echo in his skull. Jim's flashlight flickered once more before dying altogether. He was left in complete darkness. His breath came in ragged gasps as he fumbled for his phone. His fingers brushed against it, but before he could unlock the screen, something cold wrapped around his ankle. He screamed. The ground seemed to tremble beneath him, and in an instant he was yanked backward, his body slamming into the cold, damp earth. His hands scraped across the soil as he tried to claw his way free, but the grip on his ankle was unrelenting. Something dragged him, pulling him back toward the grave. His screams were swallowed by the fog, drowned out by the unnatural sounds of the cemetery that seemed to come alive in the dead of night. Jim tried to twist around, but the thing that had risen from the grave was there, towering over him. It loomed above him, its decayed face inches from his own. The stench of death and rot filled his nostrils as its empty eyes locked onto his. "Help!" Jim cried, but his voice was a mere echo. No one would hear him. Not here, not now. The creature reached for him, its bony fingers wrapping around his throat with an iron grip. Jim's vision blurred as the creature's fingers tightened around his throat. His heart pounded in his ears, each beat a desperate plea for survival. He gasped for air, the stench of death burning his nostrils. His pulse raced with fear as his mind screamed for him to break free, but his body felt like it was made of lead. The creature loomed over him, its features a grotesque parody of human, form twisted by the corruption of time and the grave. "Please," Jim rasped, the words barely escaping his lips. He tried to wrench himself free, but the grip was unyielding, and the creature seemed to relish his struggle. Its lips parted in a horrifying grin, revealing rotting teeth that were far too sharp to belong to anything human. In that moment, everything went cold. The fog wrapped tighter around them, closing in until Jim couldn't tell where the cemetery ended and the darkness began. The creature's eyes, those empty, soulless pits, seemed to devour his very essence. He felt his strength draining, as if every second of life was being sucked away piece by piece. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, Jim summoned every ounce of energy he had left. He kicked his legs, pushing against the ground, desperate to escape. His foot found purchase on the soft earth, and with a wild twist he broke free from the creature's grip. He scrambled backward, his hands trembling as he pulled himself away. But the creature was quick, far too quick. Before he could get to his feet, the thing lunged again, its skeletal hands reaching for him with frightening speed. Jim barely managed to roll out of the way, the creature's bony fingers scraping across the dirt where his head had just been. He was breathing hard now, his chest heaving, as he pushed himself up, his eyes scanning the fog for any sign of escape. But the cemetery was endless. The gate was still so far away, a tiny speck in the distance. The fog was closing in, obscuring everything but the terrible figure that pursued him. Every step he took seemed to bring him no closer to freedom, and with each breath, he felt the weight of something far more malevolent closing in on him. Jim sprinted through the cemetery, his legs burning as he fought to push past the fog and the panic threatening to overwhelm him. His footfalls were heavy, sinking into the wet ground with each step. The sound of his heart thudded in his ears, a rhythm that matched the frenzied pace of his run. But as he moved, something else seemed to shift in the air. The fog was no longer just fog. It was alive, it whispered. Jim could hear voices within the mist, soft, unintelligible murmurs at first, but growing louder, clearer. "Jim," he froze. The voice came from behind him, a soft, familiar whisper. It was his name, uttered with a tenderness that seemed to pierce the very air. He turned, his body betraying his instinct to keep running. There, in the dense fog, stood a figure. A woman. Her face was obscured by shadows, but her body was unmistakable. It was Claire, his sister. Claire? His voice cracked as he spoke her. He took a cautious step forward, his hand reaching out, trembling with disbelief. But when the fog shifted again, the woman was gone. In her place stood the creature, a monstrous, twisted version of Claire, her body hunched and disfigured, her eyes hollow and burning with a cold, malicious light. "No!" Jim shouted, his legs propelling him forward as he tried to escape the nightmare. The creature was faster than before, its fingers wrapped around his arm in an unrelenting grip, its nails digging into his flesh. Jim screamed, the pain from its touch searing his skin. It jerked him back, dragging him toward the earth. The fog swirled violently, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. He could hear the voices of the dead calling to him from the graves. Their mournful cries echoed in his ears. "You're not going anywhere, Jim." The creature's voice was a distorted version of his sister's. It laughed, a deep guttural sound that made Jim's stomach churn. He struggled to break free, but the creature's hold was like iron, its strength beyond anything human. He could feel the coldness seeping into his bones as its grip tightened. The ground beneath them began to tremble once more. Jim's eyes widened as he saw the tombstones around him beginning to shift. One by one, they began to tilt, as if the earth itself was alive. Something was rising from the ground, a mass of bodies, a sea of broken bones and rotting flesh. Jim's breath was shallow, as the cemetery seemed to come alive with the dead. The ground trembled beneath him, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. The creature, the thing that had once been his sister, grinned wickedly as the graves began to open, one by one. From the holes in the ground, figures began to emerge, their faces skeletal and their movements jerky as though their bodies were no longer under their control. He could hear the whispers again, voices rising from the depths of the earth. "They are coming for you, Jim." The voice was unfamiliar, yet it carried an undeniable sense of dread. Jim's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the horror unfolding before him. The cemetery was no longer just a burial ground. It was a place of the dead, a place where the souls of the departed were being awakened, dragged back into the world of the living. The creature, his sister, pulled him closer to the grave, her grip like ice. He fought against her, but she only laughed, dragging him toward the yawning chasm where the dead waited. Her form shifted again, and Jim saw the true face of the thing that had taken her place. It was something far older, something more ancient, and twisted than anything he had ever seen. A being of darkness, its body a mass of rotting limbs, its eyes gleaming with hunger. "Join them," it hissed as it tossed Jim into the grave. Jim fell into the grave, the darkness swallowing him whole. The earth closed around him, pressing against his body as he landed with a sickening thud. He gasped for breath, his heart racing. In his chest, the air was thick with the stench of rot, and he could feel the hands of the dead closing in on him from all sides. There was no way out. The grave had become a prison, and the cemetery was now his tomb. "Help!" Jim screamed, but no one would hear him. The voices of the dead echoed around him, their hollow, lifeless whispers filling his ears. He reached for the walls of the grave, his fingers scraping against the rough stone. But the more he struggled, the more the darkness seemed to tighten around him. It was as though the very earth was trying to consume him, to drag him down into the depths of the cemetery, where he would become one of them, one of the forgotten. The creature loomed above him, watching him with eyes that gleamed with malicious delight. It leaned forward, its lips curling into a grin. "You will never leave, Jim. You belong here now. You belong to us." The morning sun rose over Rosewood Cemetery, casting long shadows across the graves. The fog had dissipated, leaving only the stillness of the cemetery behind. But in the distance, there was a figure standing by the gate, watching. The horizon, the last shift had come and gone. Jim Hawks was never seen again,